Moscow, August 3rd, 1947. It is Aviation Day at Tushino Airfield, the Soviet Union's annual air parade, and in the crowd of hundreds of thousands stand the people this show is actually for. The Western military attachés, binoculars up, notebooks out. And then they hear it, a deep four-engine drone, and over the field comes a heavy bomber that every American in the crowd recognizes instantly, because it is the silhouette of the most advanced bomber on Earth, the American B-29 Superfortress, except it wears red stars. The attachés stay calm because there is an explanation and everyone knows it. During the war, 3 American B-29s made emergency landings in the Soviet Far East, and the Soviets kept them. 3 aircraft. So when the second bomber crosses the field, the notebooks record it without panic. And the third, 1, 2, 3, the internees dusted off for a parade. Embarrassing for Washington, but harmless. And then, by the standard account of that afternoon, a fourth shape appeared over Tushino, built on the same wings, the same engines, the same fuselage lines, and in that single second, every trained observer on that field arrived at the same conclusion at the same time. 3 could be souvenirs. 4 is a factory. The Soviet Union had not restored the American bombers. It had photocopied them. What the West learned over the following months was worse than the fly past. The copy was exact, so exact that, as the engineers' own stories tell it, a mysterious little hole in one wing of the original had been solemnly drilled into every copy, and a repaired patch of battle damage had been faithfully reproduced on the direct orders of Joseph Stalin, who had commanded his most brilliant aircraft designer to change nothing, not one rivet. This is the story of the Tu-4, the only aircraft in history whose blueprint was another aircraft, the greatest act of industrial plagiarism ever attempted, told through the strangest enemy testimony this channel has ever entered into the record. Because no enemy report has ever praised a machine the way 900 factories can. Stay to the end, because this story finishes with a punchline no writer would dare invent. The last of these copies did not leave military service until 1988, on the other side of the world from where you would guess, wearing something on its back that its American designers could never have imagined. To understand the theft, you first have to understand the treasure, because in 1944, the B-29 was not just an airplane. It was the most expensive weapons project of the Second World War, at around $3 billion, which is more than the atomic bomb program itself cost. It was, by a comfortable margin, the most complex machine ever mass-produced by human beings to that date. Its crew flew in pressurized compartments, in shirt sleeves, at altitudes where other bombers' crews were freezing behind oxygen masks. Its gun turrets had no gunners inside them. They were aimed remotely, by crewmen at sighting stations, through analog fire control computers that corrected for range, speed, and temperature. Its 4 engines each delivered 2,200 horsepower through turbochargers. Nothing else in the sky was even related to it. And the Soviet Union knew it, because the Soviet Union had asked for it. Moscow was receiving thousands of American aircraft under the Lend-Lease pipeline, fighters, bombers, transports, by the trainload. It formally requested the B-29. Washington said no. Whatever else was for sale to an ally, the Superfortress was not. Which is what makes the next chapter one of history's great ironies, because having refused to hand over the B-29, America proceeded to deliver 3 of them, free of charge, by accident. Here is how. In the middle of the war, there was a legal oddity in the Pacific. The Soviet Union and Japan were not at war with each other. A neutrality pact, signed in 1941, held between them while the rest of the planet burned, because Stalin could not afford a second front in the east, and Tokyo could not afford one in the north. And neutrality has rules. Under international law, if a warplane of a fighting nation lands in a neutral country, that country must intern it, aircraft and crew, for the duration. So when American B-29s raiding Japanese targets were damaged or ran short of fuel, their emergency option on the map was Soviet territory, and the price of using it was written in advance. On July 29, 1944, a B-29 named Tramp, commanded by Captain Howard Jarrell, damaged during a raid on Manchuria, landed at an airfield near Vladivostok. The Soviets, allies of America in Europe, followed the letter of their neutrality with Japan and impounded it. In November, 2 more arrived within 10 days of each other, one of them named Ding Hao, and a 4th crew bailed out over the hills near Khabarovsk, leaving the Soviets a crashed airframe to pick clean. Now, Moscow held 3 flyable examples of the one aircraft America would not sell it, plus a parts source. The crews, it should be said plainly, were treated as the professionals they were, and the Soviets solved the diplomatic problem of holding Allied airmen with theatrical elegance. The internees were quietly moved across the country and allowed to escape into Iran, an escape arranged from start to finish by Soviet security, so that Moscow could keep its neutral face toward Tokyo while sending Washington's men home. The airmen were sworn to secrecy about the arrangement, and some kept that secret for decades. The bombers received no such courtesy. The United States asked for them back. The request went into a silence that has technically never ended. For a while, nothing happened, because through 1944, the Soviet Union was busy tearing the heart out of the German army and had no bandwidth for a strategic bomber program. Then Germany fell, and in June of 1945, by most accounts, Joseph Stalin turned his attention to the 3 American giants parked in the Far East and summoned Andrei Tupolev. Pause on that name, because the man in this meeting is half the story. Tupolev was the dean of Soviet aviation, and 8 years earlier, his own state had arrested him in the purges on charges invented out of air and set him to designing aircraft from inside a prison design bureau, a sharashka, where the drafting tables had guards. Released in 1941, rehabilitated by necessity, he was by 1945 the most capable heavy aircraft designer the Soviet Union possessed, and he came to Stalin with exactly what you would expect from a proud man of his gifts: his own design. A Soviet superbomber, Project 64, already taking shape on his boards, informed by everything the B-29 had taught, but better where Tupolev could make it better. Stalin's answer, as the record has it, was the single most insulting compliment ever paid to an engineer. Copy the American aircraft. Exactly. No deviations, no improvements, nothing changed. And accounts of the order agree on the reasoning even where they vary on the words. The Soviet Union did not have time for Tupolev to be brilliant. It needed a strategic bomber that already worked, and the proof that this one worked was parked near Vladivostok with American serial numbers on it. Weeks later, the atomic flashes over Japan converted the order from urgent to existential, because a bomb without a bomber is a science experiment. The 3 internees were assigned their roles like organs in a transplant. One flown to Moscow and dismantled down to the last fastener. One sealed as the untouchable reference standard, the arbiter of every future argument. And one kept flying to teach Soviet crews the machine they were about to mass produce. What followed was less an engineering project than the photocopying of a civilization, and the numbers, by the standard account, read like a census. On the order of 105,000 components, every single one removed, measured, weighed, photographed, chemically analyzed, and turned into Soviet manufacturing drawings. Some 900 factories and institutes mobilized across the country. And almost immediately, the copyists discovered the problem that makes this story an engineering legend rather than a stunt. You cannot copy a part without copying the industry that made it. The B-29's skin was rolled in imperial thicknesses, fractions of an inch, on American mills. Soviet mills rolled metric. Convert 1/16 of an inch to millimeters, and you get a number no Soviet mill produced. Round the skin up and across an entire airframe, the aircraft gains tons and dies as a design. Round down and the structure weakens where the original was strong. The solution was worthy of the problem. Panel by panel, the engineers varied the metric sheet thickness. Thicker here, thinner there, so that strength and weight balanced out to the American original. A compromise negotiated one panel at a time across an entire bomber. And the skin was the easy part. The aircraft's plexiglass domes required optical-grade acrylic the Soviet Union did not manufacture. A new industry. The tires, a new formulation. The miles of wiring, the gyroscopes, the autopilot, the radar, the analog computers that aimed the remote turrets. Each one a small national program wearing the disguise of a component. This is the real meaning of the Tu-4, and it is the verdict hiding inside the story. When the Soviet Union copied the B-29, it was not copying an airplane. It was importing, at gunpoint of deadline, the American way of making things. Tolerances, quality control, interchangeable parts, mass production discipline, the entire invisible culture that the aircraft was merely the printout of. And because Stalin's order said exactly, the project produced the absurdities it is now famous for. And I will flag these honestly as the stories the engineers themselves told, preserved in the standard histories. Somewhere on the reference aircraft, the story goes, there was a small hole in the wing structure with no discernible purpose. Perhaps a factory floor fix, perhaps a drain, perhaps a mistake. The engineers debated it, escalated it, and received their answer from on high. Drill the hole. It was safer to copy a mistake than to explain a deviation. The reference aircraft carried a riveted repair patch over old damage. The stories say the patch was faithfully reproduced, and the rudder pedals bore the proud embossed logo of the Boeing Aircraft Company, which triggered, per the engineers' telling, one of the project's longer arguments about where exactness ends and absurdity begins. Understand what these stories are. Whatever their precise truth, they are the fingerprints of fear. In Stalin's Soviet Union, an engineer who improved the aircraft and was wrong had authored sabotage. An engineer who copied a flaw had followed orders. The 100% copy was not only an engineering specification, it was a survival strategy. That said, even Stalin's exactness had to bend where physics and common sense demanded, and the sanctioned deviations are their own honest list. The engines were Soviet, from the Shvetsov Bureau, of a related design lineage, with the American turbocharging carefully studied, because you cannot copy an engine plant by measuring its product. The defensive guns became Soviet 23mm cannon, which, the record shows, hit considerably harder than the American 50 calibers they replaced, the one upgrade nobody argued with. And the radios and identification systems were Soviet by definition, because a copied identification friend or foe box would have spent its service life announcing to Soviet air defenses that Moscow's own bomber fleet was American, which in every sense but the legal one, it was. When the first aircraft was assembled and weighed, the empty weight, by the standard account, came out within about 1% of the original, across 105,000 parts, 2 measurement systems, and 900 factories, 1%. On May 19, 1947, test pilot Nikolai Rybko lifted the first Tu-4 off the runway, and the Soviet Union became the second nation on Earth with a modern strategic bomber without ever having designed one. Which returns us to Tushino, August 3, 1947. And now you can read the scene the way the attachés did. 3 bombers, explainable. The 4th, a transport derivative on the same wings, a production line. The reports that raced back to Washington that week carried the real message of the fly past, and NATO would eventually give the aircraft its reporting name, the Bull. Almost overnight, American war planning acquired a new species of map, range rings, drawn from Soviet Arctic bases. curving down across Alaska, Canada, and the northern United States, because a Tu-4 flying a one-way mission could reach American cities, and planners are paid to assume the worst about return tickets. The comfortable American monopoly on strategic reach was over, and the years that followed saw the great buildup of continental air defense, radar chains, and interceptor squadrons, watching the polar approaches for the silhouette of America's own bomber coming back with the wrong stars on it. Then the punchline armed itself. On August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, a weapon that, as the espionage files later showed, owed its own considerable debt to American blueprints. And on October 18, 1951, a Tu-4 dropped a live atomic bomb in a Soviet test. Line those facts up and read them slowly. The first Soviet aircraft capable of delivering the Soviet copy of the American bomb was the Soviet copy of the American bomber. For the opening years of the Cold War, the nightmare that kept American air defense awake at night was, in every technical sense that matters, made in America. 847 of them were built. Now the honest ledger, because this channel's rule is that the testimony cuts both ways, and the Tu-4's file cuts deeper than most. Start with what the copy bought, and be fair about it. Everything. An instant strategic air force, yes, but the durable prize was underneath. The forced modernization. The standard histories credit the Tu-4 program with dragging Soviet metallurgy, electronics, instruments, and production culture forward by years, because 900 factories that learn to hold American tolerances do not unlearn them when the contract ends. The B-29 did more for Soviet industry as a captive than it ever did to Japan as a bomber. Now what the copy cost. And here is the lesson in the episode's title. When you photocopy yesterday. The Tu-4 reached its squadrons just as the jet age arrived to eat aircraft exactly like it, and the demonstration was public. Over Korea, America's own piston-engined B-29s were being mauled in daylight by swept-wing MiG-15 jets, whose engines, in this hall of mirrors, were copied from British jet engines that London had sold to Moscow in a moment of commercial optimism. The early Cold War sky was an ecosystem of copies hunting copies, and the Tu-4's own obsolescence was written into its birth certificate. It was a perfect 1944 aircraft, delivered in 1947 into a 1950s war. Copying gave the Soviet Union the answer to a question the world had already stopped asking. But, and this is the counterweight, it also rebuilt the muscles that could ask the next one, because Tupolev's bureau took the imported idioms and began scaling them through a family of enlarged descendants toward the design school that eventually produced the Tu-95 Bear, descended from this story in education rather than blueprint, and still flying today. The photocopier, given time, learned to write. So I will put both formal questions where they belong, in the comments, because engineers and historians have fought them for 70 years. 1. Was Stalin right? The exact copy against Tupolev's Project 64. Speed and certainty against pride and possibility. 2. Is the Tu-4 the greatest feat of reverse engineering in history, or the most expensive admission of dependence ever assembled? Both sides have receipts. Bring yours. The file closes with fates, and this story's fates outdo fiction. The 3 interned superfortresses were never returned. Their ultimate ends absorbed into the program they made possible, and, in the way of that country's records, left murky. The airmen went home through their arranged escape, and, for decades, kept the strangest secret of their war: that they had been rescued by their captors, quietly, so an alliance and a neutrality could both stay intact. The 847 copies never dropped a bomb in anger, not one, and were overtaken within a decade by the jets their own program had helped fund the answer to. And then the ending, nobody would dare invent. In the 1950s, the Soviet Union passed a number of Tu-4s to its new ally, China. And long after Moscow retired the type, the Chinese kept theirs working, decade after decade, so that the last military B-29 airframes on active duty flew into the late 1980s wearing Chinese markings, and the very last chapter belongs to one of them, rebuilt as an early warning radar testbed. A giant saucer-shaped antenna mounted on its back, Boeing's 1942 silhouette carrying 1970s electronics for a country that never touched the original at all. The design outlived the empire that stole it. Today, one Tu-4 rests in the museum at Monino outside Moscow, and the surviving B-29s rest in American museums an ocean away. Identical twins, separated at birth by a war, raised by enemies, retired to opposite ends of the earth, each one testifying about the other. And that is the verdict of this file. The Soviet Union never published its opinion of the B-29. It never had to. Its opinion was 105,000 parts, 900 factories, a hole drilled on principle, and a weight matched to within 1%. No enemy report in any archive, in any war, has ever praised a machine harder than that. If someone in your family flew or maintained B-29s, was interned in that strange neutral corner of the war, or worked the Soviet aircraft plants that pulled off the copy, their story belongs in the comments of this file from either side, and it will be read. Name the machine the enemy should testify about next. One name down below, and subscribe, because the next witness this court calls is already sworn in. The most feared fighter of the Pacific, an aircraft American pilots were ordered never to turn with, until one of them flipped upside down into an Alaskan bog with barely a scratch on it, and 5 weeks of testing taught America exactly how to kill it.